Hello and welcome to Value Research Helpline. I'm Ruchira and our experts here at Value Research are now all set to answer your queries on investing and personal finance. Joining us is Ashutosh Gupta, Vice President, Value Research. Welcome, Ashutosh.
Thank you, Ruchira.
Now, today's first question comes in from Darshan BP, who has a long-term horizon of 15 years and is investing 50,000 rupees per month. Most of his investments are in equity spread across large, mid, and small caps. And he asks if it's safe to have all his investments in equity or should he change his plan?
Well, his investment horizon is suitable for an all equity portfolio, but whether he should continue with an all equity one or add a little bit of debt to his investments, really he would be the best judge of this aspect. He should consider whether the ups and downs of the market make him too nervous. In fact, if we look at it this way, the last 10 to 12 months in equity markets have provided an excellent opportunity to investors to assess their risk appetite in a way that no risk assessment questionnaire or an investment advisor can do. If he reflects back on the sharp market fall in the month of March and thinks whether that made him too nervous, whether that left him with sleepless nights, then probably an all equity portfolio is something he should move away from and add 20-25% debt to his portfolio, which he can simply do by shifting to aggressive hybrid funds instead of all equity ones. But on the contrary, if he has been able to sail through these 10-12 months and the volatility that has been there during this month without much botheration, then by all means he can continue with an all equity portfolio. So this is how he should reflect upon his own behavior in the last 10-12 months to figure out whether an all equity portfolio would suit him or not.
Okay, the next query has been sent in by Rajinder Kumar Gaur and he asks, why most of the fixed maturity plans are faring so poorly? Is it the end of the road for such schemes? He's stuck with 3 such schemes and wants your advice on this.
Well, fixed maturity plans or FMPs, as they are popularly known, have earned a bad reputation in the recent times, more so in the aftermath of the DHFL defaults and the SL Group's loan against shares fiasco. These were the kind of issuers within which many FMPs were found to have disproportionately high exposures, and they paid a price for it. They caused a lot of heartburn, they caused a lot of pain to investors, and when these bonds defaulted or delayed the payments, in turn, the FMPs had to default on their payments or delayed their payments to the investors, and they earned a lot of bad reputation because of this. In principle, I don't think that FMPs were a bad product category inherently. They were quite suitable for somebody who had a very defined time frame of investment to earn a predictable return. But as I said, perhaps some fund managers threw caution to the wind and basically violated the principles of prudence and diversification while building out the portfolios. And when these issuers defaulted, they paid a price for it. As things stand now, there are hardly any new FMPs hitting the market these days. So from that perspective, it is as good as a dead category for the time being. Now, what he can do with his existing investments in his FMPs, while theoretically speaking, there is an exit route available through the stock exchange because all closed-end funds such as the FMPs are mandated to compulsorily list on a stock exchange to provide an exit window. But from a practical standpoint, there is not much liquidity in most FMPs, so that exit option may not be available to him. In the circumstances, there is really little that he can do but to continue holding them till their maturity. And actually, depending upon when these funds came out and when did he make these investments and how well they are managed, they may after all not turn out to be a bad investment from a yield perspective, given the kind of interest rate scenario we are in and what is the kind of yield that he would otherwise get on open-end debt funds. So from that perspective, they actually may not turn out to be a bad investments if he holds them till maturity.
All right, Rajan Gopalan wants to know the reason for huge difference in the expense ratios of direct and regular plans.
Oh, that's simply because of the distributor commission. If you look at the regular plans which are sold by the distributors, there is the distributor's commission embedded in the expense ratios of these plans. In equity funds, this typically tends to be in the range of 75 basis points to 1%. So when you invest in a fund, every year the fund charges the expense ratio. Out of this expense ratio, about 1% is paid to the distributor as the commission, and that is what is added to the expense ratio. Now, when we come to the direct plans, where you invest directly with the fund house and there is no distributor involved in between, that is why their expense ratios are lower by to the tune of this distributor commission. And over a long term, this difference can make a meaningful difference to the overall net worth that you are able to achieve through your investing tenure. So if you are able to transact online, if you are able to manage your investments on your own, then it is highly recommended that you opt for direct plans and not the regular ones.
All right, now Ali Asgar Khambati says his father is 78 and has been relying on high interest rate fixed deposits done in 2011 for his income. He'll be receiving about 1 crore rupees of maturity amounts from fixed deposits in the next 10 months. He wants to know how to generate enough income from this corpus with rising expenses using mutual funds.
Yes, indeed. Interest rates in general in the economy and on the fixed deposits have come down sharply. So now if his father were to renew those FDs that he earlier made in 2011, the amount of interest income that these FDs would generate would be significantly lower than what he would have been enjoying till now. If you want to take the mutual fund route, we certainly advise adding a little bit of equity portion to your retirement income allocation to keep up with rising expenses. So our recommended approach is to invest about a third of your total accumulation in good, well-diversified equity funds. And with the balance amount, you can create a fixed income allocation by spreading it across certain debt mutual funds, as well as other investment avenues like the senior citizen savings schemes. This portfolio he should rebalance at least once a year so that the equity allocation remains in that 30-35% range. And also he should take care that the income that he withdraws every year should by and large be in the range of 4 to 6% of his accumulation. It should generally not exceed 6% of the accumulation. Otherwise, he would be withdrawing his accumulation at a very rapid pace. Once he follows these basic principles, he should be able to derive regular income and also keep up with the rising expenses in the long years of retirement.
Sriram Ramanathan has achieved the target for one of his goals with over a year left to go. He wanted 11 lakh rupees for the goal and has achieved it. He wants to take money out now and move to debt funds. So what kind of debt funds should he look at to move his money into?
Well, first of all, many congratulations to him. It is very gratifying when your disciplined investment pays off and you are able to fulfill the goal for which you are investing. So first of all, many congratulations to the gentleman. Now coming to where he should park this money, I would suggest he can simply look at 2-3 liquid funds and keep this money in them till the time he actually has to withdraw it to fulfill his goal. Now for a 1-year investment horizon, there are quite a few debt categories out there, starting from overnight funds to liquid funds to ultra short-term funds to low duration funds and even money market funds. These categories are very finely classified by the kind of portfolio duration that they keep. But we generally believe that such a nuanced classification is of little use for retail investors who can simply avoid the complexity of so many debt categories, and for all the money that they want to invest for up to 1-year period, they can simply park it in a liquid fund. So this gentleman with his 11 lakh odd amount can pick 2 or 3 liquid funds, and that should do the job for him.
All right, now Lijo John is investing 1 lakh rupees per month in 5 funds with an investment horizon of 10 years, which is meant for retirement. The SIP date for all these funds is 15th of every month. Is there any disadvantage in having all SIPs on one date? Lijo wants to know.
No, I'll recommend Lijo that he can continue doing what he's doing simply by following the disciplined approach of spreading his investments every month by investing every month over the duration of his investment period would provide him with the benefit of rupee cost averaging. and should prove rewarding over the long term. Now, the question about differentiating the dates of even the 5 SIPs in a month, I think that is over complexity. That can be avoided. Even if he invests all these 5 SIPs on a single date in a month, that should be fine. Over a long term, he would derive the benefit of rupee cost averaging, and that should be rewarding.
Amitabh Narula asks, what will be the impact of Navneet Munot leaving SBI Mutual Fund? Will SBI Mutual Fund scheme start underperforming?
Well, I think that's a premature conclusion to draw. If you look at the SBI Mutual Fund equity franchise, they have a fairly strong equity franchise with quite a few competent equity fund managers. Just to name a few, they have R. Srinivasan, they have Anup Upadhyay, they have Sohini Andani. So they have a fairly credible lineup of equity fund managers. Of course, Navneet Munot has been a key figure in their investment management team. But I believe, given that there are so many other credible fund managers around, I'd like to believe that his exit should not have a material impact on the performance of the funds, or the performance of the funds should not get derailed. But I'll further suggest that, as in case of the exit of any key personnel from the investment management team, one should closely monitor these funds and revisit this issue not before the next 1.5 years. And that's something we would also do.
The next question has been sent in by Prabhu Dutt, who says, the multi-cap funds, which were effectively large cap heavy, are likely to reclassify themselves as flexi cap funds. Do you expect any basic change in their characteristics? If so, should one think of exiting these funds?
Well, in fact, the switchover of these funds from multi-cap category to the flexi cap would be, in fact, to keep status quo. Just to provide a bit of a background, multi-cap funds till recently used to be fairly unconstrained by regulatory mandate in terms of what market cap segments do they invest in. They had a fair degree of liberty, full liberty actually, to invest in large caps, mid caps, or small caps. But by a recent regulatory mandate, SEBI has mandated them to invest at least 25% of their money each in large caps, mid caps, and small caps. And that can bring about a significant change in the portfolios of many multi-cap funds. Now, after a lot of representations made by several industry bodies and industry representatives, SEBI has created a new flexi cap category which inherits the investment mandate which multi-cap used to have earlier. So now that unconstrained category is the flexi cap one. And that is why funds who want to continue with the same investment mandate would like to shift from multi-cap to the flexi cap category. So I would suggest that in case he's fine with the current market cap allocation of his existing multi-cap fund, he should not bother much if that fund moves over to the flexi cap category. In most likelihood, status quo will be maintained after this transition. On the contrary, if his fund chooses to remain in the multi-cap category, that is when there is a significant change in its portfolio is expected. And that is what should warrant a closer look by him to decide whether he wants to continue or switch over to another fund.
All right, MLN Srinivas says, HDFC short-term debt fund is rated as 5-star. It has invested 14% of its assets in AA and lower securities. Is it a safe investment?
HDFC short-term debt fund ranks among the better funds in the short duration category. It takes a measured exposure. It takes a measured approach to credit risk. Of course, it doesn't completely steer clear of lower rated papers, less than top rated papers, but the fund manager always keeps a tight lid on these exposures. That's point number one. Second is that the fund mitigates the risk of investing in slightly lower rated papers by always maintaining a very high degree of diversification at the issuer level. The third point in favor of HDFC short-term funds is its ultra low expense ratio in the context of the category and its peers. So on all these measures, it comes across as a good fund. Its fund manager, Anil Bamboli, has been in charge of this fund for over a decade now, and he has done a fine job with this fund. And that reflects in its high rating, which it has been able to maintain consistently. Now, of course, you can find other short duration funds which are managed more conservatively, but remember they would also yield lower returns given the conservatism. This fund tries to balance risk and returns in a fine way. So while it takes a little bit of credit risk, but as I mentioned, it is always in a measured dose. And therefore, we believe that if your investment horizon is 2 to 3 years or more, for your core fixed income allocation, it's a worthy fund to consider.
Natarajan has written to us asking if it's better to invest in ETFs than in mutual funds because of lower expenses. He's 40 years old and would like to invest 5 lakh rupees in lump sum for long-term growth. Is it the right time to invest? He wants to know.
Well, if he wants to invest largely in the large cap segment of the equity market, then ETFs can be a good option for him. Of course, as he mentioned, low expenses is the main benefit of investing in ETFs, which also adds meaningfully to the returns of these funds. The other thing that he should remember is to invest in ETFs, he would need to open a trading account and a demat account. So that's a requirement for investing in ETFs. Now, if he wants to broad base his equity allocation and add a little bit of exposure to mid cap and small cap stocks, then he should consider multi cap funds where this need would get fulfilled. But if it does decide to go for ETFs, then apart from expense ratios, he should also look at the tracking error of the fund, which is basically a measure of how efficiently is an ETF able to replicate the index. And he should also look at the trading volumes of the ETFs, because to be able to derive sufficient liquidity on a stock exchange to be able to buy and sell the units of ETFs, it is important that the ETF trades on most trading days and has sufficient trading volumes. So those are some of the key parameters to judge an ETF upon. Now, as regards investment of his 5 lakh rupees, we would advise him against investing in a lump sum as we do for any equity investment. He should ideally stagger this investment over at least a few months.
All right, Dhaya Duraiswamy asks, what are the various investment avenues available for US dollar investments?
Well, as far as equity is concerned, one is that these days you have plenty of international equity funds to choose from. And broadly, there are three kinds of international equity funds. One are the ETFs, which simply replicate a global index, something like a NASDAQ 100 or an S&P 500. So that's one type of funds that you have, the ETFs. Then you have the fund of funds. These funds collect money in Indian markets from domestic investors and simply invest that corpus in an overseas fund, which in turn deploys it in overseas markets. And there are plenty of good options to choose from among the FOFs as well. And finally, there are certain funds which build a portfolio of international equity stocks on their own. So they invest directly in international markets. They don't replicate an index, or they don't act as a feeder fund which feeds the money into an overseas funds. Across all these three type of international equity funds, you can find plenty of good options to choose from. Now, for an investor who likes to take charge of his investments and prefers to do his or her own research and select stocks, these days a lot of domestic brokers are also offering the facility for you to buy and sell stocks on your own in overseas markets. But of course, that will attract transaction costs, demat account costs, trading account costs. So that can be a little more expensive for certain investors. That's why for most investors, picking a good international equity fund can be a simple and cost-effective measure of getting international diversification.
Okay, now Neeti Srivastava is asking if it's fine to buy 4 mutual funds of the same kind. For example, if she wants to invest 10,000 rupees in ELSS, then should she go for 4 different tax saving funds or invest in a single fund?
Well, to answer that question, she should look at it in the context of her overall investments, not just ELSS. I'll explain with an example. So let's say this 10,000 ELSS investment accounts for just about 20 to 25% of her overall investments. Then I think even a single ELSS fund would be good enough, because there is money moving into other funds as well. So on an overall portfolio basis, she would still be diversified, even if she chooses only a single ELSS fund. But having said that, if ELSS accounts for a much bigger proportion of her overall investments, or if these are the only investments that she's making, then perhaps she can add more than one fund. But even then, I think with her scale of investments, probably just about 2 ELSS funds should be good enough for her.
AS Ganeshan wants to know, in case of merger of two equity schemes, is the original investment date considered the date of merger for calculating capital gains tax?
Well, I understand the question is about the holding period of his investments. So in case of a merger of a scheme, the holding period would be considered from the date of his original investment, and both the periods post the merger, the holding period post the merger of the schemes, and the one before when he made the original investment in the original fund, both of them would be taken into account to calculate the capital gain tax liability and whether he qualifies for long-term capital gains tax treatment or not. And more broadly, the point is that the incidence of merger itself does not trigger any capital gains tax liability. Capital gains tax would arise only when he decides to exit from his investments.
Okay, today's last question has been sent in by Ashmet Singh, and he asks, are SIPs recommended in debt funds? If he doesn't have any defined time duration for investing, which debt funds should he go for?
Well, I'd say that unlike equity, it is not compulsory to invest in debt funds through the SIP mode. If you have a lump sum amount to invest in debt funds, then by all means, you can invest all of it at one go. But if, let's say, you are generating investable surpluses on a monthly basis, then of course you can opt for instituting an SIP in a debt fund as well. Now coming to his second question, as we've often said, for your long-term core fixed income allocations, short duration debt funds appear high on our list of preference, and there are a few reasons for that. One is that they have a fair degree of flexibility to invest in different kinds of debt instruments. So they can have exposures to corporate bonds, they can have exposures to government securities, and so on and so forth. So there is a fair degree of flexibility in for investing in different types of debt instruments. On the contrary, they have a fairly limited flexibility to take duration calls, which we believe is a desirable trait. The third thing in their favor is that they are fairly reasonable in their expense ratios, which matters a lot in case of fixed income funds. So on all these parameters, short duration funds tick all the right boxes for us, and that's why we recommend them for a core fixed income allocation. Now remember that in case of short duration funds, there is no regulatory mandate on the kind of credit quality that these funds have to hold. That is left to the discretion of the fund itself. So that is something that you would have to be careful about while choosing a suitable debt fund. You may want to avoid short duration funds which take aggressive credit risks on their portfolios.
Well, that's it from us. Thank you, Ashutosh.
Thank you.
Thank you to all our viewers. You can go to VR Helpline on Value Research online and send us the questions that are stopping you from investing today. Our team will answer them in the upcoming Q&A session. Bye for now.